Hi and welcome. I'm going to present you our work on iterative multi-mode discretization with applications to clustering. This is based on a series of work on iterative complexity reduction, which I recently proposed and has application in different areas, for instance, in sorting, clustering, time series discretization, and co-clustering, which is this work. The idea is simply iteratively reduce the complexity of data so that we can obtain more signal power and identify clusters or anomalies in the data. So co-clustering is simultaneously clustering rows and columns of a data matrix. It has applications in the web and data mining, bioinformatics, marketing, and in many more areas. For example, in movie recommendation scenario, co-clustering can be output of such as young users who like fiction movies, for instance. That can be a co-cluster, a group of users or like a group of items, and or middle-aged users like drama movies. As you can see in clustering, we are interested in clustering rows or columns, while in co-clustering we are simultaneously cluster rows and columns together. So the problem is that the majority of methods are not scalable and are not feasible for very large data sets. They require a number of clusters, which is a restriction when we have two-way structures in the data. And they have no restrictions regarding overlapping co-clusters, some of these methods, and they produce extremely large solution space, which is also a problem. Our research question is that in the very large data matrix, where we should look for clusters. Can we somehow limit our search space to more interesting parts or more compact representation of the matrix? Can we find approximate location of co-clusters more efficiently, preferably with a linear in time, without requiring the user to set the number of co-clusters? Our assumption is that our co-clusters of interest probably should appear with more signal power in the less complex version of the original matrix. This is the algorithm of iterative multi-mode discretization. I'm not going to talk about the details of the algorithm. You can find it in the paper, but I'm going to present you an example how this method works. So let's imagine that we have a input matrix of real values like this one, and then we start with the mean max normalizations on the columns. And so we obtain the normalization on the first column, and then we use mean max scaling to obtain transform these normalized values to values between 1 and 9. In this example, like this is an arbitrary number of that we choose for a scale. In the paper, we propose a method for automatically adjusting this scale, but let's follow this example with the fixed number of a scale. And then we obtain this first transformation for the columns. We do the same procedure for all the columns, and then we have the output discrete matrix. This is the column-wise discretization. Then from this matrix, we find those items that are not either mean or max or median of the scales. For instance, in our example, which a scale was 9, mean is 1, max is 9, and median is 5. So we look for those values that are not either of these numbers. And then we remove from the original matrix those corresponding elements that do not match with this condition. And then we replace none with their original values. So our new input matrix becomes this one. And then we iterate this procedure again, do the discretization again, and obtain a new matrix. And as you can see in the new matrix, there is no other values except 1 and 9. So this is the point that we stop the procedure and we obtain the matrix hotspot. So how matrix hotspot is obtained is that we just remove the non-zero values with 1 and the non-values with 0. So here is the matrix point of interest for column-wise scenario. In the next scenario, we do the same procedure for the row-wise. So it means that we do normalizations and discretization and scaling on the rows. So we do the same procedure again with a scale of 9 in this example, and then we obtain this vector. So our first transformation for the first row becomes this one. We do the same procedure for other ones, and then we will have the output discrete matrix for the row-wise scenario. We do the same procedure. We just look for those items that are not either 1, 5, or 9, and then we replace them in the original matrix, the corresponding elements with nan. We iterate this procedure, do the same process, and then we obtain this matrix. Instead, this time, instead of last time, we obtain that three elements still are not either 1, 5, or 9. So we need to iterate again, remove these elements from the original matrix in the next iteration. So this one was 3, this one was none, and this one was 2, it became none. We do the same procedure and then obtain this matrix. So this is a matrix, and we don't have any more values except 1, 5, and 9, and this is the point that we stop. So this is how we obtain the hotspot in the row-wise way. So this is the matrix point of interest. Any values that is not nan becomes 1, and any values nan becomes 0. So now the next step is identification of hotspots in the matrix. So we have one point of interest for column-wise and one point of interest for row-wise. If we add these together, then those values that become 2 are actually our hotspots, because somehow there are important points in the matrix, important elements in the matrix that they appear both in row-wise and column-wise discretization. So what we do is that just extract the indices of the elements that whose values are 2, and this becomes our hotspots. Then we operate on these hotspots in the next step in the centroid discovery. So our first hotspot is this item, and then what we do is that we start to identify from these elements its corresponding row which columns has non-zero values. As you can see here, these 3 items are are 1, and then we look at his corresponding column and see which rows in this column have non-zero values. And as you can see, 3 values. And then we start with marking these columns that are non-zero, and then marking those rows that are non-zero, and the intersection of these becomes our interest. So we start with a matrix of G0, which is all values in the size of the original matrix, and all values are 0. And then we add 1 to each of these elements that appear as the intersections. So as you can see, we have here like for 6 12 intersections. So our new matrix have 12 ones. Then we go to the second row and we have this item. We do the same procedure. We obtain the intersections, and then we add it to the previous matrix, G1, the output of the previous step, and then we add 1 to those that appeared in the intersections. For instance, this element was 1, and it was intersection, so the next G2 becomes 2. 1 added this to this item. We do this procedure for all hotspots until we arrive at the last one. We do the same procedure and we obtain the last G7, which is this matrix. So from this matrix, we extract those elements corresponding to 2 in the T matrix, and then look for the corresponding values in the G7, the last obtained G. And then we sort this matrix based on the last column, value of the last column, which is actually values obtained in the G7. So the first items with the maximum number obtained in G becomes the centroid of our first important cluster. So here we have our first centroid of our cluster is this one. Then we look, so we create a cluster co-cluster 1 with these elements. Then we look at that this item is connected to the previous column, so we add these to the co-cluster, and then from this we see that also this one is connected to the above row. So item 2.2 also is added to this co-cluster. Then we don't see more connections to these ones, and then we we remove those elements that are already allocated, and the next one. The next one is this one. So we see that we create a cluster with this item, co-cluster 2, and then we see that it is connected to the it's a right column. So we add this column 2, and then there is no further connections. So we remove those and then go to the next one, which is this item. We create a cluster with this centroid of disk item, and then we see that there are two more elements that are connected to this item. So we have a cluster 3 of 3 members. And then we remove these allocated items, and we arrive at the last item, which is this one. So what we do is that now if we put a minimum support for each cluster be identified as a valid cluster, and as you can see, with minimum support of 3, for instance, which is the input parameter for the algorithm, 2 of these clusters become out of the output. So our output clusters are only 2 clusters that have only 3 members, and as you can see, one cluster is this one, and one cluster is this one. So this is an example on a benchmark simulated data from this paper, which they did a benchmark study on co-clustering methods. They provide the benchmark data sets that they simulated different number of co-clusters in the data. So for instance, in this case, we have 5 co-clusters in the matrix. And as you can see, our method can identify all these 5 co-clusters without without requiring number of clusters as an input in the algorithm. So we don't let the no algorithm what is the number of co-clusters. So which is very interesting that it identifies the co-clusters in majority of cases. More systematically, we did the experiment on all these datasets provided in this study, 100 datasets, which each group has a k number of co-clusters from 1 to 5, and each group has 20 datasets, which in total is 100 datasets. Each dataset is a matrix of 500 by 200, and then each co-cluster is a submatrix of 50 by 50. As you can see, only ITL outperforms our method. However, if you look at the true estimation of number of co-clusters, as you can see in the 35 out of 100 experiments, our algorithm can identify true number of clusters, while ITL, the competitor that outperforms our method, in none of them actually, only I think in one case can identify. So we compared with the 11 state-of-the-art co-clustering methods of 5 categories, and also on the real data of gene expression from bioinformatics. And as you can see, in 35 datasets, in 40 out of these datasets, our methods can identify the true clusters with tolerance of 1 error, while ITL can find the true clusters in 12 datasets with tolerance of 1 error. However, as you can see, what makes our method more competitive is that the output space is much more smaller than ITL, because ITL also provides clusters with overlaps. So the output solution is 1,000 times larger than our method, which means that our method provides a more efficient way for finding co-clusters. Conclusion, we propose a new family of co-clustering methods based on iterative multi-mode discretization, which shows another applications for iterative complexity reduction. Although in terms of accuracy, methods such as ITL, which is published in KDD 2003, presents a better performance. If you consider other factors such as, for instance, true estimation of number of clusters, and also overlapping results, our method is a more competitive technique. As in a future work, one direction can be applying this algorithm on higher order tensors, which is a natural extension of this work, tuning the parameters for performance improvement, and applications of IMMD-CC in other data mining problems. So Thank you very much. The code is available in this link. Thank you for your attention.